Director Cheadle, as you know, the shooter began shooting at 6:11 p.m. Eastern on July 13th. NBC reported that at 5:51 p.m., 20 minutes before the shooting began, the state police informed the Secret Service of their concern. Now, the rally was not paused at that point, correct?
No.
And according to NBC, just 2 minutes later, at 5:53 p.m., the Secret Service notified its snipers about the gunman. The rally wasn't paused at that point either, correct?
No.
Let me show you some video footage by rally goers. If you could play the video on the screen up here. This was taken 2 minutes before the shooting started. If you could turn up the volume.
Dangerous people. Criminals. We have criminals. We have drug dealers. We have people that should not be here.
Right on the roof.
It's much tougher than it happens.
Right on the roof with that.
Up here.
Ma'am, that doesn't look like suspicious behavior. That looks like threatening behavior to me. And the rally wasn't paused at that point either, correct?
I can tell you, as I stated earlier, sir, that the moment that the shift surrounding the president were aware of an actual threat.
That's a threat right there. The guy's on the roof and everybody's yelling at him.
Yes.
And directing the officer's attention to him. The rally was not paused at that point, correct?
We are currently still combing through communications and when communications were passed.
Well, I can point you to this communication. It's 2 minutes before the shots started ringing out. Director Cheadle, yes or no? Was there ever a moment where the Secret Service actually considered pausing the rally?
The Secret Service would have paused the rally had they known or been
So the answer is
there
no.
was an actual threat.
The answer is no. Correct?
I can speak to you in generalities.
No, I don't want generalities. I want
all of the
specifics.
communications.
The answer is no. You did not consider pausing the rally, correct?
The people that are in charge of protecting the president on that day would never bring the former president out if there was a threat that had been identified.
Well, they did, because we've now identified 3 points in the 20 minutes before the shooting that the threat emerged.
Welcome to the War Room. It's Natalie G. Winters hosting today, Monday, July 22nd, in the year of our Lord 2024. With a news cycle like this, it's almost like they wanted to have Stephen K. Bannon in jail. A lot of moving pieces that, don't worry, we here in the War Room will diligently strive to provide you the signal and not the noise. I'm honored to be joined by both Mike Benz and Dr. Darren J. Beattie. For this show, we're going to dive into all things assassination attempt, the just abysmal hearing that we heard today, but also, of course, the kind of inevitable and continued fallout with President, soon to be not that, Joe Biden. But I just want to say real quick, channeling, of course, the inner Steve Bannon, who we wish could be here. All of this discussion about DEI hiring, affirmative action hiring processes, and women in the Secret Service. Of course, I'm sure you guys saw DHS putting out a statement over the weekend, absolutely just disgusting, saying, oh, this is sexism because you're daring to question, women in the Secret Service, which I would say is really the only meaningful statement besides the one that they did a 180 on about refusing additional security protections for President Trump in regard to the shooting. That this whole push, frankly, from right-wing media, I think it's Coups, talking about affirmative action, DEI hiring processes being responsible for what happened at that shooting. You watch that clip and you tell me that this was not an intentional failure, right? That has been the age-old question of the Biden regime. Is it a result of incompetence, or is it an intentional dereliction of duty? And whether it's the southern border, the economy, frankly, just the mental health of Joe Biden and the cover-up we've seen go on there, I think with this assassination attempt, the answer to that question is as clear as day. And we need to stop talking about how, oh, it's DEI, oh, it's affirmative action, oh, it's women, because we are giving them the leeway. We are effectively making their argument a lot less weaker and having them have a lot less questions to answer for when it comes to what happened with this shooting. And if Stephen K. Bannon were sitting here or I guess he'd be sitting in DC behind that desk, that he'd be saying the same exact thing. And in terms of setting the goalposts on where we need to go forward with this movement, whether it's the shooting or Joe Biden, it's not enough for him to just put out some weird statement that's not even on official letterhead with a signature that doesn't even look legit, not even including an endorsement of Kamala Harris, only coming via tweet a few minutes after. We need the 25th Amendment because this man is not capable of being president of the United States. Our adversaries, frankly, even our allies, are sitting around looking at us, laughing at us, because they know that they have the ability to take really an open shot on goal. And with that, kind of springboarding off of that clip that we played, which I think is just so damaging to the integrity of this woman, if there is any left, Dr. Darren J. Beattie, we will bring him in, former Biden regime member. I'm sorry, your former boss is maybe no longer with us, who knows. But Darren, your thoughts on today's hearing with Kimberly Cheadle?
Absolutely. I'm very excited to be with you, Natalie. And I should note that, yes, indeed, I was a former Biden official. And when Biden fired me, he sent me a letter with White House letterhead, unlike the letter that was mysteriously posted on Twitter. And, maybe there's nothing to it, but it is a bizarre situation after a major announcement like that, have no kind of visual component to it whatsoever, and not a word from him even now on Monday. As to your other comment about DEI and the Secret Service, the state of our crumbling empire is such that after one failure to another, we have one question to ask. Was it diversity or was it the deep state? Seth Rich, was it diversity? Was it the deep state? Assassination attempt on July 13th. Was it diversity or was it the deep state? And, it highlights the interesting way in which the deep state and the regime uses and can strategically use the cover of diversity in order to get away with things. I think the disproportionate number of women and clear incompetence there indicates people can just chalk it off to, oh, yeah, it's just manifest incompetence. Look at these women who can't even holster. And if it had been successful, people might be more inclined to say, oh, in this case, it was just diversity, and not ask some of the darker questions about what might be behind this. Another thing we have to say, irrespective of all that, we can be sure of one thing. It's either criminal negligence or complicity. And in either case, forget about resigning, which is, think of how insane that is, that this woman doesn't even resign, that Biden hasn't fired her, which he has the authority to do. But it's either criminal negligence or complicity. And in either case, forget about resigning, there should be Secret Service members put in prison for this, in either case. And it's actually so dark and so disturbing that there's a non-negligible possibility that it's actually the latter, that it's complicity, that this was intentional, that this was a setup. And, there are different realms of incompetence. If it were something where, maybe someone blinked, or an oversight that is conceivable. But as we've seen from this fact pattern of interrogation of this woman and the reporting that's come since, this is a level of incompetence that's simply inconceivable upon multiple layers. Just the fact that a guy is able to get on that roof. The crowd identifies him, and even then they don't stop the rally at all. I mean, these two things together are inconceivable. There's no drones that identify the person. It doesn't make any sense. And then all the weird things about we have no meaningful details about the shooter whatsoever. This looks really strange. And it gets even worse when we contextualize this in light of the Secret Service as an agency and its history of politicization and corruption. It used to be that the Secret Service was under the Department of Treasury. Ever since September 11th, Secret Service has been under the Department of Homeland Security. So it's not just this weird situation where Biden, up until this point, was the candidate running against Trump, where Biden, who claims Trump is a threat to democracy, Trump incited January 6th, which is the worst terrorist event since the Civil War. That was his official position. And yet the person who's saying that Donald Trump is a danger to the country, who incited a terrorist event, he's in charge of Trump's personal security, to the point where even today, Biden has the authority to fire Cheadle. And it's worse than just the fact that Biden has control over the security of his chief political rival until Kamala took over. It's worse than that because the Secret Service is housed within the DHS, which is the most aggressively politicized and weaponized agency in the entire government. Remember, it was the Disinformation Governance Board in the DHS. All of these initiatives were in the DHS. It's the DHS who very early on identified quote unquote white supremacy, and by that they mean Trump supporters, as the number one terrorist threat to the country. And this is the group overseeing the protection for Donald Trump. And then you see all of these discrepancies that don't make sense. And it really intersects powerfully with a story that we've done that I think is now front and center, one of the most important stories in the country. People should read it at revolver.news. And this is the Secret Service's behavior on January 6th with the pipe bombs.
Well, and Darren, I want to come to that story, and I want if the studio can play the B-roll of what we're going to talk about. But it's also, the same DHS that is overseeing this basically criminal invasion going on at the southern border, which I think is fair to call election interference. And I think you can draw a similar comparison, right? The people who are making the decisions, it's an intentional destruction of this country. It is election interference. And I think too, right, the only shooter that we've probably known less about is maybe the transgender one out in Tennessee. But whenever it's a shooter that fits their narrative in terms of pushing gun control, and if the parents were remotely Republican, I mean, the place that, the shooter's parents went to the gym within 12 hours of the shooter happening. With this person, you don't even know. Apparently there's, no online accounts. We can't even get really interviews with anyone substantive. There's some hardcore information warfare going on here. And that sort of brings me to this news story that you guys have up, which of course intersects with the Harris stuff. And we'll get into that for a second. But how does this pattern of behavior that we've seen from Secret Service, where, like you say, it's either criminal negligence or complicity, it doesn't just start on July 13th. This started a while back. Let's play the footage just as B-roll, and we'll have Darren talk over it. But just explain to the audience what they're seeing and why this is so important.
Okay, so the full video and explanation is available on revolver.news. We have the piece up. It's, I think, third or fourth down, and we walk through in great detail. So if people get confused, go there and share it. But essentially, this is surveillance footage of the discovery of the DNC pipe bomb. Again, we can't get into all the crazy stuff about that pipe bomb. People have to go to Revolver News for that. But in this clip, we see someone who we now know to be a plainclothes Capitol police officer go and inform Secret Service detail parked there at the garage. That Secret Service detail is protecting then VP-elect Kamala Harris, who was in the building at the time. Now, upon being informed of this pipe bomb, just at a bench, just right outside the frame there, right outside the building, right next to these people, they have the most lackadaisical response imaginable. It takes them a minute to even get out of their car, whereupon they stand around. See, they just being informed there, so we're a bit out of synchronicity in terms of the time, but people can watch it again. But they wait for a couple minutes to get out of their car. They stand around lackadaisically, like there's not a care in the world. And then really the most scandalous aspect of this whole video is at a certain point, you can see the Secret Service agents standing around with the Capitol Police, and they allow a group of school children to walk right across that street in the direction of the pipe bomb and walk right by it, which is astonishing. So they clearly know it's either they don't care about their own lives and these kids and all that, or more likely, far more likely, they somehow knew in advance that those pipe bombs were fake. Which is interesting because just after this event, they go through the motion and the spectacle of getting a bomb-safe robot to, quote-unquote, defuse the pipe bombs, which is interesting because they just let a group of school children walk right by and they clearly knew that it didn't pose a threat. But the question is, how would they have known that? How would they have known that in advance? Now, this comes after the Secret Service initially swept that area and somehow missed the pipe bomb, which was sitting very conspicuously by the bench. So already you have this really clear analogy to the events of July 13th, where it was, first of all, they did this sweep and managed to miss the pipe bomb, which is inconceivable, just as it was inconceivable that they let a guy up on the roof with a gun. But then even more inconceivable, upon being informed of the pipe bomb, when Kamala Harris was there, their protectee, they do nothing, and they even let a group of children walk by it before they get the bomb-safe robot to defuse it. So,
and has Kamala Harris ever
are
publicly acknowledged this whole incident? Right, it's not something that she talks about.
Yeah, here's where it really gets interesting. So this would be suspicious in its own right. But again, this Secret Service detail happened to be Kamala. So here's where we have this kind of spectacular confluence of a lot of things that are front and center in our national spotlight right now. The Secret Service and Kamala Harris. And they're both intertwined with one of the darkest secrets of January 6th, which sheds light directly on a still darker secret of July 13th. Because think about this. The Democrats have bent over backwards for years now, shoving in our throats this idea that January 6th was a terror event. They've gone through the lengths of even lying. They lied about this officer, Brian Sicknick, claiming that the MAGA mob bludgeoned him to death. We proved that that was false. New York Times corrected that. And yet here's a case where they don't have to lie. They could truthfully and correctly say that Kamala Harris came within a hair's width of the MAGA pipe bomb, or the deadly pipe bomb. Of course, we know it's not MAGA, but the deadly pipe bomb. That should be their number one talking point about January 6th. Come to think of it, why haven't they said one single time that Kamala Harris almost lost her life to this pipe bomb when they're bending over backwards to make it a domestic terror event? Joe Biden, on the third anniversary of January 6th, did a long speech, like half hour. He didn't mention a single time. Kamala Harris has given speeches about January 6th. She claimed she was in the Capitol. Not a word about, oh, I almost lost my life to the MAGA pipe bomb. How dark does that secret have to be such that she would keep that under wraps and forego the political benefit from milking that? Why is this, which should be their number one talking point about January 6th, their most carefully guarded secret? Now that, compounded by the surveillance footage that shows the Kamala's own Secret Service acting in a manner that's inconceivably suspicious. You don't get informed of a pipe bomb within feet of you and your protectee and stand around there like it's nothing and then let a group of school children walk right by it. You just don't do that. And if that weren't suspicious enough, they're on record as having swept that area and magically they didn't find it. It's only found at a time that's perfectly synchronized with the unfolding attack on the Capitol. So again, we see a really remarkable confluence of factors that implicate directly not only the Secret Service, which has very dark questions in relation to July 13, but Kamala Harris herself, who is now the presumptive nominee for the Democrat Party. It's the biggest story in the country. And now, especially that Kamala is a presumptive nominee, she should be forced to answer these questions about her own Secret Service. There's another amazing confluence of events. I don't know if we have time. Maybe we should discuss it in a different time. But what's going to unfold in the coming weeks is we're going to see the linkages between the January 6th op and the July 13 op.
And Darren, I'll have you back on to discuss that. I know you got a punch shortly, but before I let you go, I'd love to just kind of get your thoughts. Obviously, you've received a letter from the president, at least yours had the official seal and probably an official signature. Just your thoughts on sort of the fallout of Joe Biden stepping down, if you think Harris is going to not just be the presumptive nominee, but become the nominee, your just kind of analysis of everything going on at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, we're drinking through a fire hose with all these, monumental events happening. It's, historic announcement. I find it very weird and frankly creepy. It's creepy that we just got a letter that he clearly didn't write, posted on an X account, which we know he doesn't run, without any of the lettering, and then no kind of televised address to the nation yesterday or even today. And it looks like his schedule is totally blank. He's gone totally dark. For all we know, he's in Guantanamo right now. It's like we have no idea what his condition is, which is unsettling not only as Americans, but it certainly doesn't send the best message to the rest of the world either. So I think it's very weird, very creepy. As for Kamala, I do think that she will end up being the nominee. I can't say for certain, but I think that's a pretty good bet at this point. And she's going to get a white guy, probably a straight white guy, to run as her running mate. And frankly, there's been a lot of confidence, even overconfidence, for those of us who would love to see Donald Trump back in the White House. I think we need to temper that, to check that. As ridiculous as these people are, as evil as these people are, they're not to be discounted. I wouldn't talk about, Trump's going to win in a landslide, any of that. This is going to be a very close, very brutal fight to the very end.
And I'm sure they'll roll out, whether it's a pandemic, another crowd strike type attack, interestingly affected Maricopa County election machines. I'll have you back on to discuss that and so much more. But in the meantime, if people want to follow you, read all the Revolver pieces you mentioned, where can they go to do all that?
Absolutely. Revolver.news. It's 3 or 4 pieces down. This one about Kamala Harris. We got a major one about an ATF agent who's now head of dignitary protection at the Capitol Police, who is my #1 suspect for the key cover-up guy for January 6th. Now, all of these things are going to come together. The January 6th op and the July 13 op are linked, involve a lot of the same agencies and even the same people. So stay tuned as this most important story in the country blows up over the coming weeks.
Pattern recognition. We love it here in the War Room. Darren, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Natalie.
Someone else who is very adept at pattern recognition, and I think your predictions came true. You were on War Room, what was it, last week or 2 weeks ago, saying that once you see the kind of intel community, the national security officers come out in full force, write a letter demanding that Joe Biden step down, that will be kind of the final move that precipitates the demise of Joe Biden. And I don't know in what capacity I'm referencing demise, because we haven't seen or heard from him. Who knows how he's doing? But we're joined by Mike Benz. Mike, if you want to walk us through the developments on the effort to oust, the successful effort to oust Joe Biden, I'm sure the audience would appreciate your insights.
It's been an amazing 48 hours to witness the same sort of regime change machinery that's used to oust foreign governments be debuted once again here on a sort of scale miniature. I had been looking for the past 3 weeks. I had made a video that's got over 1 million views on my X timeline about the missing secret sauce that would signal the end of Joe Biden's presidential run, and that would be a letter from the Blob, the foreign policy establishment, which spans our State Department, our Pentagon, and our intelligence community. So basically state, DOD, CIA. And the reason that I said that would be the signal of the end is because that is Joe Biden's power base. If you go back and look at Joe Biden's entire political career, he was effectively groomed by this foreign policy establishment, this blob. Even mainstream media ran in his 2020 presidential election run that his run was the revenge of the blob. He was Mr. Foreign Policy, according to the Council on Foreign Relations. He was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for 20 years and on it for 40 years. He's the guy who blocked Jimmy Carter's CIA director nominee in 1977. Because remember, Joe Biden became a senator at just 29 years old. And so that's really his power base. There's this nexus between the blob and BlackRock in terms of commercial and financial interests that really sit at the nexus of Joe Biden's political power. Now, what I thought was very interesting is on Friday night, the IC effectively sent a letter asking, effectively demanding Joe Biden step down. Now, when I say the IC, it was former members of the IC, which is to say it was 48 members of the State Department, intelligence community, and national security state, people who had been members of either Biden's or Obama's or Clinton's State Department, Pentagon, intelligence community. And there are a few interesting things about that letter that triggered me to say, okay, this is signaling the end. One of them that was very interesting, it was 48 of them, which rivals the 51 spies who lied about the Hunter Biden Russian disinfo laptop. So, approximated that same pedigree of and numbers, but the actual signatories were very interesting. Among them was Rosa Brooks. Rosa Brooks was the head of the Transition Integrity Project. She was she had a high-level Pentagon post.
And Mike, we got to jump to break. And when I hear the name Rosa Brooks, that's someone who Raheem and I, back in the days of the Transition Integrity Project, lit up so much so that I think she ultimately stepped down. I remember Raheem had some funny DM exchanges with her where she sort of said, "Yeah, everyone I'm working with is crazy. It's not a very legit operation." I think that was projection. But you got to go in the meantime to birchgold.com/Bannon. You guys always say I'm cutting Mike Benz off, so we have him for the entire next block. So make sure you stick around. We're going to drill into this, of course, all things assassination attempt. But like I said, in the meantime, if you want to support this show, send a signal to the regime that you back the show and our sponsors. Give a call or check out birchgold.com/Bannon to get the latest installment of The End of the Dollar Empire. Your favorite Mike Benz after the break.
All this nonsense, all this spin, they can't handle the truth.
War Room Battleground with Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room. We're still joined by Mike Benz walking us through, despite sort of what seems to be a media void, a media blackout on what exactly precipitated Biden dropping out. Mike has sort of pieced together, I think, the limited information that we have available. Mike, if you want to pick up where you left off, walking us through kind of these chain of events that led to the statement we saw come out yesterday.
Well, I find it fascinating that the resignation announcement happened just 2 days after the intelligence community appeared to have dealt the death knell. And again, among those signatories were not just prestige members of CIA cutouts like the former head of USAID and the former head of Voice of America, but also Rosa Brooks, who we were just discussing. Rosa Brooks was the head of the Transition Integrity Project. She was a former high-level Pentagon official with the CIA Blue Badge, and she ran the election coup simulator for the 2020 election to come up with creative ways to make sure that Joe Biden was installed as president, even if Trump won the election fair and square. They ran 4 simulations in June 2020, together with high-ranking Pentagon, intelligence, State Department, and political officials, including the former heads of both political parties, Donna Brazile of the DNC and Michael Steele of the RNC, both hardcore never-Trumpers. And in simulation 3 of this 4-part simulation, it was titled Clear Electoral Win for Donald Trump, which meant even if Trump won the Electoral College, how could they role play? And John Podesta, under Rosa Brooks's project, personally role played Joe Biden as they essentially did a role playing tabletop strategy game about what they could induce, what kind of crises they could induce in the country in order to shut it down and get Joe Biden as president, even if Trump won fair and square. Now, among those were organizing rent-a-riots all across the country. This was about a month after the George Floyd riots kicked off. And one of the things that Rosa Brooks' simulation involved was ways that the Biden campaign could do favors for Black Lives Matter, such that they would be responsive to a call from the Biden campaign to take to the streets. Now, that, frankly, sounds like a criminal plot, let alone some plot from an insane coup simulation movie that they conducted. But the fact is the same day that Rosa Brooks signed that letter and the rest of the former IC did, we found this strange pop-up movement called Pass the Torch Joe, which was essentially the beginnings of a street protest movement from within the Democrat Party to force Joe Biden to step down. They held this big rally right in front of the White House with drums and signs and looked like about 500 or 700 people just on day one of this totally astroturfed, simulated street protest movement to get Joe to step down, which is strikingly similar to what they planned 4 years ago on a much larger scale, involving the unions and dozens of groups to get Trump run out of office. So you have this blob which loves this rent-a-mob style, signal of democracy because the people are taking to the streets in order to kind of induce this crisis within the White House to show that it's illegitimate, that the people want change, and that perception of illegitimacy allows a crowbar of extraordinary and post-constitutional action to take place in the name of saving democracy from extraordinary threat to it. So I find it amazing that, this really shows that what we're up against in D.C. is not the Democrat Party, so to speak, if you are a Republican, or it's not the Republican Party if you're a Democrat. What you're up against is this blob apparatus that will regime change people within its own party using the same tactics that the CIA has been doing since 1948 against our own presidents here at home. And I'm no fan of Joe Biden, but the fact is there are forces in Washington far more powerful than a president. We saw them cracked open against Donald Trump in his first term. We just saw them cracked open against Joe Biden. And now this parasite, this blob parasite, is searching for a new host body to occupy. And that's really what we're on the lookout for in the next few weeks.
Well, and I remember with the Transition Integrity Project that one of the co-founders of it, Nils Gilman, I think he ultimately step down or something like that because he called for the execution of who was it? One of the high-level Trump officials. I'm forgetting who. Michael Anton. He called on Twitter for him to be executed. And I remember this is the same Transition Integrity Project that it was the wildest thing that they said. I'm reading from their little dossier that they put together that the government could, quote, rely on surrogates to embed operatives inside protests to encourage violent action. Yet they said everything that we said about January 6th was, a total conspiracy theory. And speaking of conspiracy theories, there's obviously a lot of those, at least the way that the mainstream media is referring to it, swirling around regarding the assassination attempt on President Trump. You have Representative Anna Paulina Luna tweeting this morning that after today's hearing, she thinks that it's really implausible that Thomas Matthew Crooks was acting alone. I know you've done a lot of interviews on this, but if you could sort of distill that into what you think the most significant developments are that we've seen on the assassination attempt front, either today's hearing or just in general.
I will. I want to make one quick note about Nils Gilman, since you mentioned him. He's a very interesting figure. I think he was second in command in the Transition Integrity Project under Rosa Brooks. Now, he's also a part of something called the Berggruen Institute, which is a very interesting institution. It's funded by, and its board member is Reid Hoffman, the same person who funded the E. Jean Carroll lawsuit against Trump, the lawfare, the political lawfare, who funded the New Knowledge scam, in which this cyber political hatchet firm run by two former Obama State Department officials created 23,000 fake Russian bots and mass subscribed them on Twitter to Senate candidate Roy Moore in the 2017 Arizona special election. And then they told their buddies, New Knowledge did, in the press, that Roy Moore was being backed by the Russians. And it turned out 2 years later, they were busted that they had actually bought a bot farm and used a VPN to pipe it in from a Russian server. So Reid Hoffman, one shot after another, is this political hatchet man doing corrupt cloak and dagger political black ops. And Reid Hoffman also was just 1 week before the assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life, basically quipped to Peter Thiel on a panel after Peter Thiel said, "You guys are making Trump a martyr," and Hoffman replied, "I wish we actually had." Now, what's also interesting is Reid Hoffman, who funds and is on the board of the Berggruen Institute, actually hosted a panel at the Berggruen Institute, which Nils Gilman was a part of the institution. This panel was called "How Elections Corrupt the Democratic Process." So this institution that Gilman was a part of, and Gilman was a part of this Transition Integrity Project, which again plotted to get Biden in office even if he lost the election, they held a full panel on how elections should not be considered the core of democracy, because elections can have people like Donald Trump elected. And what we need is essentially a mafia of oligarchic institutions who define democracy rather than the will of the people. And lo and behold, one of their pet vassal states, Ukraine, has canceled elections entirely. They now call that consistent with democracy. But you effectively have this shadowy billionaire network that is totally down with destroying the concept of elections forever as long as it threatens their power. Now getting to the assassination topic, you just had Darren Beattie on, and this is what Darren said is exactly right. And I want to drill down into one point in particular, which is this through line between J6 and J13, between the January 6, 2021 and the July 13th, 2024 events on this pipe bomb issue, which connects the FBI, the Secret Service, and these fatal attempts on American lives. What Darren went over in that segment was the DNC pipe bomb and the strange activities of the Secret Service there, which that pipe bomb was left out for 17 hours before it was discovered, we are told. It was left out at 8 p.m. on the front leg of a bench at the entrance of the DNC building. And then it was only discovered at 1 p.m. the following day. That's the official story. Now, the official story is that the Secret Service discovered this pipe bomb, and we didn't even know where Kamala Harris was until an entire year later. Remember, the Justice Department lied in their indictments of the first wave of January 6 indictees by saying that Kamala Harris was inside the building being chased around by protesters. It only turned out an entire year later the public learned that Kamala Harris was at the site of the DNC pipe bomb, meaning the Secret Service must have swept the area. Now, there's this big confusion about what the heck actually happened with this pipe bomb. And there's one thing Congress can do right now, which is why whatever subcommittee is formed to interrogate J13 has to fold in the J6 pipe bomb into its interrogation. And by the way, remember, we just learned that Crooks potentially had an explosive device. And I'll get to that in a second here. But the FBI took all of the footage of the DNC headquarters. They haven't posted a single new video file since September 2021. Now, what's really amazing is they have a stationary camera facing out at the site of the pipe bomb being planted at the DNC, on the park bench where they have the pipe bomber sitting and text messaging. Then they show the pipe bomber exiting the frame and going around the building. We then have a second footage from the FBI from the opposite side where it's secluded by a shrubbery. But the FBI cut off the tape right before, in camera one, right before the pipe bomber takes anything out of the bag. Why would the FBI withhold the actual commission of the crime? What if it wasn't the same device? What if the item that was planted, if any items actually were planted by the pipe bomber at 8 p.m. on July 5th, what if that was not actually the pipe bomb? What if somebody planted it in the early morning hours? What if a rogue member of Secret Service potentially found something that was inconsistent? This can all be cleared up simply by subpoenaing the FBI for the chain of custody of that DNC camera and zooming in to see what the heck was taken out of the bag. How can the FBI explain a $500,000 bounty to identify the pipe bomber when they won't even show us the footage, which we know they have, unless lightning struck the camera the moment they cut it off, of the pipe bomber taking the pipe bomb out of the bag? So again, you have this FBI Secret Service 1-2 punch, where the FBI is sitting on the grenade of the evidence, and the Secret Service was supposed to be protecting it and magically missed a 101 level mistake. I don't buy it for a second, and this investigation needs to join together those two events.
Well, speaking of cover-ups, it seems like there's such a lack of information coming out about Thomas Matthew Crooks when, you juxtapose it with other shooting incidents, maybe with the exception of the, trans terrorist in Tennessee. You know everything about, their second or third aunt and who they voted for politically. Meanwhile, with this guy, you don't even really know anything about his political affiliations. They're saying he wasn't online. I find that hard to believe. In terms of how you see already, if we can call it a cover-up, sort of developing when it comes to Thomas Matthew Crooks. I think today's hearing with Kimberly Cheadle sort of, really lends credence to that, right? The system always protects its own. But where do you think they're going to go with that narrative in terms of information on him, his motivations, and just in general, this very hyped up investigation that Kimberly Cheadle keeps referencing in that hearing?
The issue is nobody plans an assassination of the United States president on their own, thinking about it in odd hours of the night. You get radicalized to that point. You are talking to a community of people online. They are goading you on. You're doing it to impress them. They are helping you with the logistics. They're feeding you information. We're told that this person, there's a video of him using a Raspberry Pi. He was a computer guy. We're told that he had 3 encrypted foreign accounts. We don't know what exactly the details of that are at this point, but we're told that he was using encrypted chat. The fact is all that stuff can be broken. And the main issue is first of all, and let me make one more connection to the January 6th event. We're now told that Crooks appeared to have had some sort of explosive device detonator that was discovered. We don't know the exact details, but whatever it was, it appears to have potentially been a dud device, just like the January 6th pipe bomb, just like the bombs that were attempted to be sold by the FBI to the Whitmer Fednappers. If you remember, that whole plot involved the FBI creating a Truman Show around the life of a loner, Adam Fox, living in the back of a vacuum machine repair shop. This is where this homeless loner was living, and they surrounded him by about 13 federal agents and informants and tried to teach him how to make pipe bombs and even sold him pipe bomb making materials. They did the same thing in 2017 with another member of the 3 Percenters, where they once again taught a lone kid, young guy, how to make a pipe bomb. They even had him press the detonation button. That was how they got the indictment, because it turned out it was a dud device. So they showed the intent to kill by creating a dud device. So we have, once again, the FBI loves almost nothing more than how to teach deranged loners how to make explosive devices. So we have this 20-year-old kid who's got a sniper rifle, who's got drone technology. He's evidently a computers expert, and we're supposed to believe he learned all of this in a library. The fact is they were at his house. They have his router. That means they have his IP address. That means they have every Google search, every computer login. And we don't have a single text message from his phone or his home device, a single communication, a single email, or a single social network link. Nobody believes this. And the giant
Mike,
gorilla in the room.
Too, how do you contextualize this in terms of the Iran narrative that they then started pushing very shortly after the shooting? Again, not that we buy into that neocon warmongering talking point, but them sort of trying to use the foreign agent, foreign actor perspective to sort of either distance themselves from blame or just do the foreign agitation kind of narrative. And I know you're getting to the gorilla in the room, and I realize I unintentionally cut you off. I'm sure the audience is going to get mad, but you can pick up where you left off. But I'm just curious how that narrative sort of works into the information warfare side of things too.
Yeah. So first, on the gorilla in the room, it's that what if there was a Fed in his group chat? What if the FBI had advanced knowledge of this? Because just like with the Buffalo shooter, we were told there was this deranged right-wing shooter in Buffalo, New York, just 2 years ago, and it came out 6 months later that the Buffalo shooter had a retired FBI agent in the group chat launching an investigation as to whether the FBI had foreknowledge of that, just like they had foreknowledge of the 2015 Garland, Texas ISIS shooting, where it came out 4 years later that the FBI had an informant texting him to tear up Texas. And an informant paid $125,000 to become this lone gunman's best friend. And the FBI, 4 years later, it turned out, was actually trailing the shooter in a car on his way to the shooting. An entire attempted murder trial played out without that fact being disclosed. What if that happened here? And what if somebody in the Secret Service or the diminished Secret Service capacity allowed this 1-2 punch of the FBI radicalizing a loner and them saying, well, you know, it would be a nice thing if he actually did take out the president. So we're going to have somebody work with some member of Secret Service is going to be told, look the other way on this. And then the FBI will wipe their hands of it and say, oh, well, we didn't know he was really going to do it. We were still monitoring for a potential crime, but deep down they knew, or they are sitting on the evidence. How can Congress
work to get those answers? What do they need to do?
What we need is an independent investigation with subpoena power. I mean, it comes from the House Judiciary Committee or it comes from the House Oversight Committee. And the second thing we need is people in the Justice Department sitting in a federal prison if they don't comply with subpoenas from those committees. The fact is the canary in the coal mine for all of this, the litmus test, the standard bearer about whether or not we can have a country free from a corrupt spying and domestic intelligence secret police state is whether or not Representative Anna Paulina Luna's motion for inherent contempt to put Merrick Garland either in a prison cell or fined into oblivion over his refusal to comply with the subpoena of the Biden-Hur tapes. That has to be done for every subpoena around this investigation.
And Mike, we're coming up against the end of the show, so I've got to let you go. But if people want to follow you, support your foundation, where can they go to do all that?
Best place is on X at Mike Benz Cyber, all one word, Mike Benz Cyber. Also, my foundation's website is foundationforfreedomonline.com. Thanks, Natalie.
You guys do wonderful work. Thank you so much for joining me. I know the posse loves you, and we'll have you back later this week. And in the meantime, War Room Posse, like I said, go to birchgold.com/Bannon, but also check out Public Square. Don't give your money to companies that hate you, companies like CrowdStrike that are involved with a bunch of Clinton conspiracies and then seemingly seem to cease operations on days when news cycles happen like this. And a few days later, Joe Biden stepping down. Like I said, it's a crazy news cycle, but don't worry, here in the War Room, we will always give you the signal and not the noise. That is my task and purpose, as Stephen K. Bannon says, and it is your task and purpose too. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you back here tomorrow.